It was a chaotic afternoon at Grand Central Station, the air thick with the clamor of hurried footsteps and overlapping voices. Travelers darted across the vast concourse, some hauling oversized suitcases, others arguing with ticket agents or laughing over coffee. Exhaustion hung heavy on those returning from long trips, their eyes glazed as they slumped on benches. Train 227, bound for the distant coastal city of Port Regal, was ready to board. In the first-class lounge, a sanctuary of plush chairs and soft lighting, passengers sipped overpriced cocktails or scrolled through their phones, their faces lit by the glow of screens. Among them sat a quiet man, unassuming in a plain gray jacket and dark pants. His shoes were polished but not flashy, his small duffel bag tucked neatly beside him. His face was calm, almost unreadable, his dark eyes scanning the room with a quiet intensity. He held a first-class ticket, yet he stood out, a black man, alone, dressed simply in a space meant for the elite. He didn't look like a tycoon or a celebrity. No gold watch adorned his wrist, no designer briefcase sat at his feet. Yet he sat there, peaceful, waiting for his train like everyone else. Curious glances flicked his way. A woman in a fur coat whispered to her companion, her eyes lingering on his modest attire. A businessman in a pinstriped suit glanced up from his laptop, frowned briefly, then returned to his emails. The quiet man said nothing, his hands folded over his ticket, his presence steady as a rock in a stream. When the announcement crackled through the lounge, "First-class passengers for train 227, please proceed to platform 9. He rose smoothly, his movements deliberate, and joined the line forming at the gate. The platform buzzed with activity, porters weaving through the crowd, the air sharp with the scent of diesel and coffee. The conductor at the gate was a wiry Caucasian man with slicked back hair and a starched navy uniform that seemed to inflate his sense of authority. His name tag read, Harold. He flashed a toothy grin at the passenger ahead, a white man in a tailored suit clutching a leather attaché case. Harold scanned the ticket with a flourish. "Right this way, sir, best seat in the house," he said, his voice dripping with charm. Then came the quiet man. Harold's smile vanished like a snuffed candle. He eyed the man's dark skin, then his unassuming clothes, his small duffel bag. "Hold it right there," Harold said, raising a hand like a traffic cop. "This is first class. You sure you're in the right place, pal?" His tone carried a sneer, loud enough to draw attention. The quiet man calmly handed over his ticket. Harold snatched it, squinting at the details, carriage A, seat 2A. His lips curled into a smirk. "This has to be a mistake," he muttered, his voice carrying to the nearby crowd. He looked the man up and down, his gaze lingering on the plain jacket. "First class ain't for folks like you. You must have grabbed the wrong ticket, or maybe someone's playing a prank." Heads turned. A young woman in a bright red coat gasped audibly, her hand flying to her mouth. A businessman in line adjusted his glasses, his frown deepening. Phones emerged from pockets, their cameras trained on the scene. The quiet man's voice was steady, almost soft. "That's my ticket. Seat 2A. Harold laughed, a sharp, mocking bark that echoed off the platform. "Oh, come on now. You expect me to believe you shelled out for first class? Look at you, no suit, no shine, no nothing. Bet you're trying to sneak in where you don't belong." The crowd's murmurs grew louder. A teenage girl whispered to her mother, "Why is he being so mean?" The mother shushed her, but her eyes stayed fixed on the confrontation. Harold waved a hand dismissively, as if swatting away a fly. "Step aside, pal. You're holding up the line. We'll sort your economy seat later, probably where you meant to be." The man didn't move, his eyes locking onto Harold's. "I paid for first class. That's my seat." Harold's face reddened, his jaw tightening. "Don't get smart with me," he snapped. "You can't even spell first class, let alone afford it. What's your game, stolen credit card?" A collective gasp rose from the crowd. More phones lifted, their red recording lights blinking. A man in a business suit muttered, "This is ridiculous." The quiet man stood his ground, his voice unwavering. "I'm not here for trouble. I just want my seat. A junior conductor, a nervous young man named Tim with wire-rimmed glasses, hurried over. Everything okay, Harold? He asked, his voice tight. Harold leaned in, his voice a stage whisper. This guy's got a fake ticket, trying to scam his way into first class. Thinks he can pull one over on us. Tim took the ticket, his hands trembling slightly, and scanned it with a handheld device. A green checkmark flashed, accompanied by a soft beep. It's valid, Tim said quietly, his eyes darting between Harold and the man. Harold's eyes narrowed to slits. Valid or not, look at him. Does he belong in carriage A? Use your head, Tim. The crowd grew restless, their whispers turning to murmurs of disapproval. A mother with a toddler shuffled past, and the quiet man stepped aside to let her through, his courtesy stark against Harold's hostility. I'm not here for drama, he said. I just want my seat. Tim hesitated, his face pale. Harold, maybe we should just… Harold cut him off, his voice sharp. You want to lose your job, kid? Let me handle this. The quiet man sighed, his eyes kind but firm. I'll take my seat now. Harold froze, his authority crumbling as the crowd watched, some filming, others shaking their heads. Finally, he stepped aside, but not without a venomous hiss. Go on, then. But don't think you're fooling anyone. We'll see how long you last in there. The man walked onto the train, his steps measured, his dignity intact. Passengers whispered, some in support, others in confusion. Carriage A was a haven of luxury, with plush leather seats, polished wood paneling, and a faint scent of lavender air freshener. Seat 2A was by the window, offering a view of the platform's chaos. The man stowed his duffel bag in the overhead bin, sat down, and pulled a small notebook and pen from his pocket. He began to write, his face serene, not a word or frown escaping him. Harold boarded the carriage, his eyes boring into the man before he turned to serve other passengers, offering them warm smiles and bottled water. Across the aisle, a French executive named Pierre Dubois adjusted his cufflinks, his sharp eyes taking in the scene. He'd witnessed the altercation and felt a growing unease. Something about the quiet man's demeanor, calm, almost regal, stirred his curiosity. The train's whistle blew, and a voice announced over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, train 227 is departing. Please take your seats and ensure all belongings are secure. The man closed his notebook and gazed out the window as the station slid away, the world outside blurring into green fields and distant hills. Inside carriage A storm was brewing, its tension crackling beneath the surface. No one, not Pierre, not Harold, not the passengers filming, knew who the man in seat 2A was. But they would soon, and the revelation would shake them to their core. The train glided smoothly along the tracks, its rhythmic hum a soothing contrast to the tension in carriage A. The quiet man in seat 2A sat with his seatbelt fastened, though it wasn't required on a train. He didn't recline his seat or order the complimentary champagne offered to first-class passengers. He simply stared out the window, his dark eyes deep and thoughtful, as if carrying a weight no one else could see. His hands rested on his lap, one finger tracing the edge of his notebook, now tucked back into his pocket. Harold moved through the carriage, distributing snacks and drinks with a forced smile. His charm was reserved for everyone except the man in 2A. When he reached the seat, his tone turned icy. What do you want to drink? He asked, his voice flat. Water, please, the man replied gently, his accent soft but clear. Harold snorted, a mocking edge to his voice. Still or sparkling? Or do you even know the difference? The man's expression didn't waver. Still is fine. Harold tossed the water bottle onto the tray table, letting it roll precariously toward the edge. The man caught it with a steady hand, straightened it, and took a sip unruffled. The deliberate slight didn't go unnoticed. Pierre Dubois, seated across the aisle, watched closely, his jaw tightening. He'd met plenty of arrogant people in his years as a CO, but Harold's behavior was something else, petty, cruel, and unprovoked. The quiet man exuded a quiet strength, a dignity that Harold seemed determined to trample. When Harold passed out hot coffee and warm towels, he skipped seat 2A entirely, his steps quickening as he moved past. The elderly woman in 2B, her silk scarf knotted elegantly, whispered to her companion, a silver-haired man in a tweed jacket. "Why is he ignoring that poor man? He's done nothing wrong." The man in 3C, a lawyer with a briefcase at his feet, muttered to his wife. "He probably thinks the guy's out of place. It's disgusting." In the economy cars, the atmosphere was lively, children darted through the aisles, passengers laughed over card games, and the occasional baby's cry pierced the air. But in carriage A, the tension was palpable, a silent storm brewing. Tim, the junior conductor, pulled Harold aside near the galley, his voice low but urgent. "You need to stop this." Tim looked alarmed, his hands fidgeting with his scanner. "You're going too far, Harold. This isn't just about you anymore." Harold scoffed, brushing past him. "He's the one who's too far, out of his depth." The train lurched slightly, hitting a rough patch of track. Passengers gripped their armrests, and a few cups rattled on tray tables. Harold's voice boomed through the carriage. "Folks, just a little bump. Keep seated, and we'll be fine." As he passed seat 2A, he paused, his eyes glinting with malice. "Better hold on tight, pal," he said with a sneer. "Wouldn't want you falling out of that seat you don't belong in." The man looked up, his voice calm as ever. "Thank you for the heads up." Harold's smirk faltered, thrown off by the man's unshakable poise. He moved on, but the tension in the carriage thickened, the passengers' whispers growing louder. Lunch was served, and the first-class passengers received gourmet trays, seared salmon, roasted vegetables, and delicate pastries. Harold served them with flourish, chatting amiably with each guest. When he reached seat 2A, he dropped a tray that was noticeably different, a small sandwich, no sides, no dessert. "Here," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "Hope this suits your standards." The man looked at the tray, then at Harold, and nodded. "Thank you." His politeness was a quiet rebuke, and it stung. Pierre had seen enough. He leaned toward Harold, his French accent sharp. "Why are you treating this man like garbage?" he demanded, his voice low but firm. Harold's face flushed. "Mind your own business, sir." Pierre didn't back down. "I paid for a civilized trip, not to watch you bully a paying passenger. You're an embarrassment." Other passengers murmured agreement. A woman in 4A clapped once, her face tight with disapproval. Harold's eyes darted around, his confidence cracking. He stormed to the galley, muttering under his breath. "Uppity foreigners sticking their noses where they don't belong." In the galley, Harold paced like a caged animal, his fists clenched. "Who does that guy think he is?" he hissed to himself. "Sitting there like he owns the place." In seat 2A, the man closed his eyes, breathing slowly. He was no stranger to hostility, but Harold's brazen cruelty was a new kind of storm. He reached into his jacket pocket and touched a small folded cloth, the national emblem of his country. It was a quiet reminder of who he was, though he wore no insignia today. The cloth grounded him, a silent anchor in the face of disrespect. The intercom crackled. "Attention, passengers! We are 30 minutes from Port Regal. Please prepare for arrival." Passengers straightened up, stowing trays and zipping bags, but the storm in carriage A wasn't over. Harold returned, standing near seat 2A, his arms folded. "Hope you enjoyed first class," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Next time, pick the right car, save us all the trouble." The man's eyes opened, steady and piercing. "Sometimes we choose a seat not for luxury, but for what it represents. I'll keep choosing this one." His words hung in the air, their weight lost on Harold but resonating with those nearby. Pierre leaned forward, nodding slightly, while the woman in 2B whispered, "He's got more class than that conductor ever will." The train slowed, its wheels screeching as it pulled into Port Regal's Grand Station. The announcer's voice echoed, "Welcome to Port Regal. Please remain seated until we come to a complete stop." Passengers gathered their belongings, but all eyes were on seat 2A. The quiet man had endured Harold's relentless insults with grace, never raising his voice or losing his composure. Harold, however, wasn't finished. As passengers began to disembark, he approached again, his voice low and venomous. "You're lucky you made it this far," he whispered, leaning close. "You smell like you haven't bathed in weeks. First class doesn't hide that stink." The elderly woman in 2B gasped, her hand clutching her scarf. "That's enough," she snapped, her voice trembling with outrage. Harold shot her a glare. "Stay out of it, lady. This doesn't concern you." Pierre stood, his tall frame imposing. "Harold, you've disgraced yourself and this railway company," he said, his voice steady but sharp. "This man has shown more class than you could ever hope to. You're a disgrace." Harold's face turned scarlet, his hands shaking. "Class? He's nobody!" he spat. The crowd gathered, some filming, others whispering. A young man in a hoodie muttered, "This guy's gonna regret this." The train doors opened, and a warm breeze swept through the carriage, carrying the salty scent of the nearby coast. On the platform, a black SUV waited, flanked by 4 uniformed soldiers standing at attention. A red carpet stretched from the train to the vehicle, its edges fluttering in the breeze. Passengers peered out the windows. "Is there a VIP on board?" a woman asked. "Maybe a diplomat," another speculated. Harold looked puzzled, his brow furrowing. "No VIP was listed on the manifest." Tim approached, his face pale as he held out his phone. "Harold, you need to see this," he said, his voice urgent. He showed a photo, the quiet man, not in a gray jacket, but in a military uniform, addressing a crowd of thousands with flags waving behind him. The caption read, "President Ibrahim Traoré, leader of Burkina Faso." Harold's jaw dropped, his eyes wide with panic. He looked at seat 2A, where the man was calmly retrieving his duffel bag from the overhead bin. "No, impossible," he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. The man stepped toward the exit, his movements unhurried. Harold called out, his voice cracking. "Wait, sir, sir!" The man paused, turning. Harold's lips quivered, his bravado gone. I didn't know. I'm so sorry." President Traoré's eyes held no malice, only a quiet truth. "Would knowing my title have changed how you treated me?" he asked, his voice gentle but piercing. Harold opened his mouth, but no words came. "Respect isn't for presidents alone," Traoré said. "It's for every person, every day." He walked out, his head high. On the platform, the soldiers saluted sharply, their movements crisp and precise. One opened the SUV door, but Traoré paused, glancing back at the train. Passengers watched through the windows, some with tears in their eyes, others shaking their heads in shame. Pierre approached, his voice humble. "Mr. President, forgive us," he said. "Your humility is extraordinary." Traoré smiled faintly. "Humility shows how deep a heart runs." Inside the train, Harold slumped into an empty seat, his face pale, his hands trembling. Tim stood over him, his voice soft but firm. "You didn't just insult a president, you insulted everyone he represents." The train manager appeared, his face grim. "Harold, you're off duty. Expect a full review, and don't expect to keep your badge." Outside, cameras flashed as Traoré entered the SUV. The news spread like wildfire, videos of Harold's cruelty, the quiet man's dignity, and the shocking reveal went viral before the train was fully unloaded. At the station, staff whispered in disbelief. "President Ibrahim Traoré was on our train, and Harold insulted him like that?" In a small office near the platform, Harold faced the station manager, his uniform now feeling like a heavy costume. "I didn't know," he stammered, his voice weak. "That's not the point," the manager snapped, pacing. "You judged him by his skin, his clothes. You said he smelled, that he didn't belong. You've shamed this company, and you've done it before." Harold's eyes widened. "Before?" The manager nodded. "We've had complaints, passengers you've belittled, dismissed. This time, you picked the wrong man." Harold's face fell, tears welling. Outside, Traoré met the city mayor, who was sweating profusely as he apologized. Traore raised a hand. I traveled as a man, not a leader. I wanted to feel what others feel. Now I felt it, prejudice, raw and ugly. A reporter shouted. Will you sue? Traore shook his head. No. The world's seen the lesson. That's enough. Later that evening, at a press conference in Port Regal's City Hall, Traore stood before a global audience, his plain jacket replaced by a military uniform with the Burkina Faso flag pinned to his chest. I boarded that train as a passenger, not a president, he began, his voice steady and clear. I faced hate, not for my title, but for my skin. This isn't about me, it's about dignity for all, rich or poor, known or unknown. He paused, his eyes scanning the crowd. I forgive Harold, not because I'm weak, but because the lesson is already delivered. He must choose to grow or remain small. The audience erupted in applause, some shouting, Yes! Others wiping tears. The quote he closed with was later painted on station walls. If your power makes others feel small, it is not power, it is weakness. Harold, watching the broadcast from his small apartment, broke down, his face buried in his hands. His phone buzzed with messages, some from strangers, others from colleagues. You're trending for all the wrong reasons. How could you? One message, from his sister, cut deepest. I thought you were better than this. He wrote a letter that night, his hands shaking. Dear President Traoré, I'm sorry, not because you're a president, but because I was blind. Dear viewers, if you enjoyed this story, subscribe, like, and share with your friends. Turn on notifications for more inspiring tales.